Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Gazumping occurs when an agent or seller accepts an offer you make to buy a property at an agreed price, but the property is sold to someone else. This usually happens when the vendor sells the property for a higher amount. This happened in 2018, and it remains one of the proudest moments of my life. My best friend Sarah and her husband Mike have 5 kids together. They lived in an expensive coastal city and rented an old 4-bedroom house for $650 per week. The house was seriously run down with a kitchen straight from the 1970s and perpetually blocked drains, but it was all they could manage at the time. Mrs. Lee, the owner, was a kind elderly woman who had made her fortune in real estate. She took a liking to Sarah and her family right away. "You remind me of my own daughter when she was starting out," she told Sarah one day over tea. She kept their rent unchanged for 5 years and promised them first right to purchase once they saved enough for a mortgage. Mrs. Lee had helped other struggling families before, so Sarah and Mike trusted her word and saved every possible dollar. After 5 years of careful budgeting, they finally had enough. "We're ready to buy, Mrs. Lee," Sarah told her excitedly over the phone. "We've got the deposit saved up." 2 days later, Mrs. Lee suffered a fatal stroke before anything could be put in writing. Enter the new owners. Mrs. Lee's 4 children. Each one was already wealthy from their own business ventures, and now they'd inherited a massive property portfolio. When they first met with Sarah and Mike, the eldest son, Richard, seemed understanding. "Of course we'll honor Mother's wishes," he said smoothly. "Just wait until the probate period is complete." Feeling assured, Sarah and Mike started making improvements to the house. They stripped the dated wallpaper, gave the walls a fresh coat of paint, and drew up renovation plans. When probate finally cleared, the siblings agreed to proceed with the sale at the previously discussed price. Sarah and Mike applied for their mortgage, confident everything was falling into place. The bank's rejection hit them like a thunderbolt. Without warning, the Lee siblings had raised the asking price by $120,000. To add insult to injury, Richard informed them the house would be listed on the open market. "We're having an open house next Saturday," he said with a practiced smile. "You're welcome to make an offer then." In the current market, the house would likely sell within days. Sarah called me in tears. "We might be able to borrow more," she said, "but not in just a week." The situation was even more dire because property values and rents had skyrocketed while theirs had remained frozen. If they lost the house, finding another affordable 4-bedroom would be nearly impossible. Current rents in their area averaged $1,200 per week. I was worried for my friends, but more than that, I was furious. These people were millionaires many times over, yet they were trying to squeeze an extra $30,000 each from a struggling family. Pure greed. While Sarah and Mike desperately called mortgage brokers, I started planning. I researched what makes properties attractive to buyers. We needed to do the opposite. Make the place seem undesirable without making my friends look like bad tenants. We started by making the space feel cramped. We borrowed extra furniture, pushed everything away from the walls, and hung massive motorcycle posters everywhere. "This makes the rooms look tiny," Mike observed with a grin. For the smell factor, Sarah boiled cabbage for hours. We sprayed ammonia near all the entrances, making it seem like the neighborhood cats had marked their territory. The piece de resistance was pouring 24 rotten eggs down the drains, creating an unmistakable sewer stench. "Hey Tom," I called my neighbor. "Can we put that old sofa of yours in your front yard for a day? Just trust me on this." The neighborhood transformation was my masterpiece. I rallied every friend with a noisy car to drive past during the open house. "Just keep circling the block," I instructed. "Make it look like rush hour." Then I contacted my rugby team. Picture 30 massive guys in leather jackets gathered for a BBQ next door. My teammate Steve fired up his grill, and we made sure the music was just loud enough to be noticeable. "How often do you guys party here?" a potential buyer asked one of our rugby players. "Oh mate, every few weeks," he replied cheerfully. "Tonight's actually pretty tame compared to usual. Did anyone warn you about the drain problems? The smell gets pretty bad when it rains." The open house was a parade of grimaces and quick exits. One woman didn't even make it past her car, watching the rugby team's impromptu party before driving away. The only serious prospect left after chatting with our planted BBQ guests. Sarah and Mike's offer was the only one on the table. They still paid more than originally planned, but nowhere near what the Lee siblings wanted. When another buyer tried to gazump them with an offer $45,000 higher, our state's anti-gazumping laws protected the deposit Sarah and Mike had already paid. That's how my friends got their house, and how we gave some greedy landlords a taste of their own medicine. For context about the rent, $650 in 2018 was already steep. By 2023, similar houses in our area were commanding $200 weekly. Sometimes justice needs a little help from your friends and some creative thinking. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never wanted to be that guy who tows people's cars, but sometimes life forces your hand. This is the story of how I ended up having to tow dozens of entitled homeowner association members' vehicles from my private property, leading to one of the most satisfying instances of karma I've ever experienced. Some background. I own a small warehousing and storage business on the outskirts of Phoenix. The property has been in my family since the 1970s when my grandfather bought it. It's about 2 acres with several large warehouse buildings that we rent out to small businesses for storage. The property is completely fenced in with proper signage stating it's private property. About 5 years ago, a developer built a fancy gated community right next to my property. You know the type. Cookie-cutter houses starting at $800,000, perfectly manicured lawns, and of course, an extremely strict homeowner association run by people with way too much time on their hands. At first, things were fine. The developer actually approached me during construction and offered to buy my property, but I declined. This is my family's legacy and my livelihood. Plus, I had long-term tenants who relied on the storage space for their businesses. The developer seemed understanding, and that was that. Fast forward to last year. The homeowner association hired a new board president, Karen. Yes, her actual name. Karen made it her personal mission to improve the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. One of her first actions was to implement strict parking rules within the community. Each house was limited to 2 vehicles in the driveway, and street parking was completely banned overnight. This caused immediate problems for residents with more than 2 cars or those who had guests staying over. The homeowner association's solution? They started telling residents they could park in my lot. I first noticed something was off when I arrived early one morning and saw about 15 cars parked in various spots around my property. These weren't my tenants' vehicles. I know all their cars. These were clearly residential vehicles belonging to the homeowner association community members. I immediately called the homeowner association office and spoke with Karen. "Good morning. This is Karen from Saguaro Heights Homeowner Association. How may I help you?" "Hi Karen, this is John from the storage facility next door. There are several cars parked on my property that I believe belong to your residents. I need them removed immediately." "Oh yes, we implemented new parking regulations and suggested residents could utilize your vacant lot space for overflow parking. It's really a win-win situation. You have all that empty space and our residents need somewhere to park." I was dumbfounded. "Excuse me? This is private property. You can't just tell people to park here without my permission. I need these vehicles removed today." Karen's tone instantly changed. "Now listen here. Your empty lot is an eyesore to our community. The least you could do is allow our residents to make use of it. Besides, they're not hurting anything. That empty lot is used by my paying tenants who need access to their storage units. Those cars are blocking loading zones and fire lanes. This is a liability issue and completely unacceptable. Well, I've already sent out a community newsletter informing residents they can park there. You really should be more neighborly about this." I ended the call and immediately contacted my lawyer, Mike. He advised me to document everything and put up additional "no parking, violators will be towed" signs around the property. I also sent a certified letter to the homeowner association office formally stating that any unauthorized vehicles would be towed at the owner's expense. The next morning, there were even more cars. I counted 23 vehicles scattered across my lot. I walked over to the homeowner association office with copies of my lawyer's letter and property documentation. The office assistant tried to tell me Karen was in a meeting, but I insisted on waiting. After 30 minutes, Karen finally emerged. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, waving my letter. "You can't threaten our residents." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm informing you that you're encouraging your residents to trespass on private property. This stops now, or I will have every single vehicle towed." Karen smirked. "You wouldn't dare. Do you know how much influence our homeowner association has in this community? We could make things very difficult for your little storage business." That was all I needed to hear. I pulled out my phone and called Mike right there in front of her. "Mike? Yeah, I need you to contact Big Jim's Towing. Tell them I need multiple trucks at my property first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to need to remove at least 20 to 25 vehicles." Karen's face turned red. You can't do this. Those are expensive cars belonging to important people. Watch me, I replied, walking out of her office. That evening, I sent an email to all my tenants warning them about tomorrow's operation and asking them to arrive a bit later than usual to avoid any chaos. I also set up security cameras to document everything. The next morning at 6 a.m. sharp, 4 tow trucks from Big Jim's arrived. Jim himself came along, knowing this would be a big job. We had already discussed the logistics. Each vehicle would be photographed, documented, and towed to their secure lot following all legal requirements. You sure about this, John? Jim asked. This is gonna cause one hell of a storm. They were warned multiple times. Let's do it. We started with the vehicles blocking fire lanes and loading docks. By 6:30 a.m., the first wave of angry homeowner association residents arrived. A man in an expensive suit came storming up to me. What the hell do you think you're doing? That's my BMW. Sir, you're parked illegally on private property. There are multiple signs warning that violators will be towed at owner's expense. You can retrieve your vehicle at Big Jim's Towing. Do you know who I am? I'm on the homeowner association board. Karen told us we could park here. Karen doesn't own this property. I do. And I never gave permission for anyone to park here. In fact, I explicitly forbidden it in writing. More residents started showing up, all with similar reactions of entitlement and disbelief. Some threatened to sue me, others threatened to call the police. I welcomed both options, having all my documentation ready. The police did show up around 7 a.m., called by multiple angry residents. I calmly showed them my property deed, the warning signs, the certified letter to the homeowner association, and security camera footage showing the unauthorized parking. The officers confirmed I was within my rights and actually stayed to keep the peace as more vehicles were towed. Karen arrived at 7:30 a.m., practically foaming at the mouth. She marched up to me with her phone recording. This is harassment. You're targeting our residents deliberately. No, this is protecting my private property rights. You were warned multiple times not to direct your residents to park here. You chose to ignore those warnings. We'll sue you for this. Every single resident will file a lawsuit. Please do. I'd love to show a judge the recording I have of you threatening to make things difficult for my business if I didn't let you use my property without permission. That made her pause. She knew she'd overplayed her hand. By 9 a.m., we had towed 27 vehicles in total. The combined towing and storage fees would cost each owner several $100s. But the real fun was just beginning. Word spread quickly through the community about what happened. Many residents were furious. Not at me, but at their homeowner association board. Turns out Karen had never actually gotten board approval for her parking policy changes. She had unilaterally decided to ban street parking and then solved the problem by volunteering my private property without permission. The following week, an emergency homeowner association meeting was called. I attended as an interested party, along with my lawyer. The room was packed with angry residents. One by one, people stood up to share their stories. I had to pay $380 to get my car back. My husband missed an important meeting because his car was towed. Why weren't we told this was private property? Who's going to reimburse us for these fees? Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she was just trying to improve the community and that I was being unreasonable. But when residents demanded to see documentation of board approval for her actions, she had nothing. One resident, a lawyer himself, stood up. This is a clear case of negligence by our homeowner association board. Not only did they implement unauthorized parking restrictions, but they actively encouraged residents to trespass on private property. Every single person who had their vehicle towed has grounds for a lawsuit against the homeowner association. The room erupted in chaos. Karen tried to blame everything on me, but another board member interrupted her. Actually, I have emails showing Mr. Johnson warned us multiple times about this issue. He even sent a certified letter that Karen ignored. This is entirely the homeowner association's fault. The meeting ended with Karen being immediately removed from her position as board president. The homeowner association's insurance company was contacted about covering the towing fees, and the original parking rules were reinstated while a proper solution could be found. But the story doesn't end there. Remember how Karen threatened to make things difficult for my business? Well, she tried. Even after being removed from the board, she started a smear campaign against my storage facility on social media and local business groups. She claimed I was running an illegal operation, that my property was unsafe, and that I was discriminating against the community. That's when Mike, my lawyer, suggested it was time to fight back. We filed a defamation lawsuit against Karen personally, complete with recordings of her threats, screenshots of her false allegations, and documentation of the financial damage she was trying to cause my business. The discovery process was particularly enlightening. It turned out Karen had been running several other unauthorized schemes during her brief tenure as homeowner association president. She had been accepting kickbacks from certain contractors, using homeowner association funds for personal expenses, and even trying to arrange the sale of my property to a developer friend of hers, which explained her aggressive behavior toward me. When all this came to light, Karen suddenly became very interested in settling the lawsuit. Through her lawyer, she offered to pay a significant sum and issue a public apology if I would drop the case. After consulting with Mike, I agreed on one condition. The apology had to be made in person at another homeowner association meeting. The second homeowner association meeting was even more crowded than the first. Karen, looking considerably humbled, read from a prepared statement. I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Johnson and his business for my actions. I abused my position as homeowner association president and made unauthorized decisions that caused harm to both the residents of our community and to his business. My subsequent attempts to damage his reputation were completely false and inappropriate. I am deeply sorry for my behavior. The new homeowner association board then announced they would be covering all towing fees for the affected residents through their insurance policy. They also implemented new rules requiring board votes on any major policy changes and explicitly prohibited board members from making arrangements with neighboring properties without proper legal agreements. As for my business, it actually improved after all this. The publicity from the incident led to several new storage clients, and my reputation for standing up to homeowner association bullying earned me respect in the business community. I even had other property owners reach out for advice on handling similar situations. One of my favorite outcomes was when several of the homeowner association residents became storage clients themselves. Turns out, once they actually talked to me like a human being instead of treating me like their personal parking lot, they realized I run a legitimate and useful business. Tom, one of the residents who initially threatened to sue me, now rents 2 units for his classic car restoration hobby. He stopped by my office last week to chat. "You know, I was furious when my car got towed that day," he admitted. "But looking back, you did us all a favor. Karen was running that homeowner association like her personal kingdom, and somebody needed to stand up to her." I nodded. "Sometimes people need a wake-up call to realize they can't just take what they want." "Well, I'm glad it was you who gave us that wake-up call," Tom laughed. "Though I still wish it hadn't cost me $380 to learn that lesson." The new homeowner association board has been much more professional to deal with. They actually approached me properly about working out a paid arrangement for overflow parking during large community events. We negotiated a fair contract that protects both parties' interests, and now there's a proper system in place for residents to request temporary parking when needed. Last I heard, Karen moved to another state after selling her house. Apparently, living next to the storage facility she tried to destroy was too much for her ego to handle. Her replacement on the homeowner association board is a retired judge who understands property law and the importance of doing things by the book. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, document everything. Those security cameras and certified letters were worth their weight in gold. Second, stand your ground when you're in the right, even if it means making some people angry. And third, sometimes the best revenge is simply enforcing your rights firmly but professionally. My grandfather always said, the best way to deal with bullies is to show them their actions have consequences. Looking back on this whole ordeal, I think he would have been proud of how I handled it. I didn't seek revenge or try to escalate things. I simply stood my ground and let the law do its work. These days, the relationship between my business and the neighboring community is actually quite positive. The new homeowner association board regularly communicates with me about any concerns, and we work together to maintain a respectful coexistence. Some residents even joke about the Great Towing incident of 2023 at community events. As for me, I've gained a reputation as someone who won't be pushed around but is always willing to work with people who approach things the right way. My business continues to thrive, and I've even expanded, adding a new storage building to meet increased demand. The security cameras that documented the towing incident are still running, though these days they rarely catch anything more exciting than the occasional desert wildlife. But they serve as a reminder that sometimes you have to stand up for what's yours, even if it means being that guy who tows people's cars. And you know what? I'm perfectly okay with that. Last month, I got an unexpected visit from one of my tenants, Sarah, who runs a small antique restoration business from one of my storage units. She was grinning as she walked into my office. "You're not going to believe this," she said, pulling up a chair. "I just got a new client from 3 states over. Guess who?" "Who?" "Karen's ex-husband. Apparently she took some valuable family heirlooms when they divorced, and he finally tracked them down at an estate sale. He needs them restored and heard about my business through, get this, the viral social media posts about the towing incident. We both had a good laugh about that. It seems karma has a sense of humor after all. The incident has also led to some positive changes in how homeowner associations in our area operate. The local property owners association invited me to speak at their annual meeting about the importance of respecting property boundaries and proper communication between neighboring communities. Several other homeowner associations have used our case as an example of what not to do and have revised their policies accordingly. One particularly satisfying development came when the City Council used our case as motivation to pass new regulations requiring homeowner associations to have written agreements with any private property owners before making arrangements involving their property. They actually invited me to speak at the council meeting where the ordinance was discussed. The issue here wasn't just about parking, I told the council. It was about respect for private property rights and the importance of proper communication between neighboring property owners. When homeowner associations or any organizations make unilateral decisions affecting others' properties, it creates unnecessary conflicts that could easily be avoided through proper channels. The ordinance passed unanimously, and now it's known informally as the Karen Rule among local property managers. My grandfather's old office still sits in the corner of the main warehouse. His desk calendar from 1978 is still there, showing the day he closed the deal on this property. Sometimes when I'm dealing with difficult situations, I sit at that desk and think about what he would do. He built this business from nothing, working 7 days a week to provide a needed service to the community. He taught me that success isn't just about making money. It's about maintaining your integrity and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Last week I had another interesting visitor. It was one of the former homeowner association board members who had served under Karen. He had recently started his own small business and was looking for storage space. "I have to admit," he said during our meeting, "I was one of the people who thought you were being unreasonable during the parking situation. But after seeing how everything played out, and especially after learning about Karen's other schemes, I realized you were just protecting your business and your rights. I respect that now." We signed his rental agreement that day, and as I was showing him to his unit, he asked, "Do you ever regret taking such a hard stance? It must have been stressful dealing with all that conflict." I thought about it for a moment before responding. "You know, standing up for what's right isn't always comfortable, but if you back down just to avoid conflict, you're inviting people to keep taking advantage. Sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand and hold it." The impact of this incident continues to ripple through our community in unexpected ways. The local business association now offers workshops on property rights and neighbor relations, using our case study as a teaching tool. I've even been asked to contribute to a book about property management and conflict resolution. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome has been the transformation in how the storage facility is perceived by the community. What was once seen by some as an eyesore is now recognized as a valuable local business that serves an important purpose. We've even started hosting community events in our parking lot, properly permitted and organized, of course, including a monthly food truck rally that brings neighbors together. The security cameras that caught all the drama that morning still record everything that happens on the property, but these days they mostly capture moments of cooperation instead of conflict. Residents politely using our designated visitor parking spaces during events, homeowner association maintenance crews respectfully working around our property lines, and neighbors waving as they pass by. It's amazing how quickly things can change when people learn to respect boundaries and communicate properly. The Great Towing Incident could have created lasting animosity between my business and the neighboring community. Instead, it led to better understanding, clearer guidelines, and stronger relationships. As my grandfather used to say, Sometimes you have to weather a storm to appreciate the calm that follows. He was right as usual. The storm of tow trucks and angry residents that morning led to a much better situation for everyone involved. Well, except maybe Karen, but that's a different story. These days, when new residents move into the community, they often hear about the towing incident as part of their orientation. The homeowner association uses it as an example of how not to handle neighbor relations, and I've heard it's become something of a local legend. People still occasionally ask me about it, and I'm happy to share the story as a reminder that standing up for your rights doesn't make you the bad guy. It just makes you responsible. And that's really what this whole story comes down to. Responsibility. Responsibility to protect what's yours, responsibility to respect others' property, and responsibility to handle conflicts in a professional and legal manner. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it in the end. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.